Hi and welcome. I'm Kerry Chausmer, GHSA's Director of Programs and Member Services, and I am so glad that you're joining us today. We're pleased to partner with GHSA Associate Member Honda to bring you today's webinar on the dangers of counterfeit parts, which is the second webinar in our pre-annual meeting series. Today we'll discuss the real-world impact of counterfeit parts, what they have on consumers, and then approaches that are being taken to combat this growing problem. Before we dig into the issue, I'd like to introduce Jennifer Thomas, Vice President of Corporate Affairs at American Honda Motor Company.
Great, thank you, Kerry. Good afternoon and welcome everyone. First, I want to thank the Governor's Highway Safety Association for partnering with Honda to highlight the importance of stopping counterfeit auto parts and for putting together today's discussion on this critically important safety topic. I'd also like to thank our panelists and all of you in attendance for joining this discussion and for collaborating on ideas and solutions for this public safety issue, which is a top priority for Honda. When most people think about industries impacted by counterfeit goods, the automotive space doesn't immediately come to mind. However, the reality is that counterfeit auto parts are a major problem in the United States. The issue has been a growing concern for several years now. And this is especially troubling because Honda and many automakers go to extraordinary lengths to design and build every part of our vehicles with safety in mind. Counterfeits don't. In fact, a single counterfeit part, whether it's an airbag, a brake pad, or even a windshield wiper, can compromise the safety of not just the driver or their passengers, but all road users. One of Honda's core philosophies is safety for everyone, and I'm proud that my company continues taking a leadership role in addressing this problem. But we can't do it alone. The help of state governments and safety advocates is essential to educating consumers and law enforcement about the dangers of counterfeit parts and to coming up with creative solutions to stay ahead of the bad actors. Today, we will discuss a few innovative ideas to address the plight of counterfeit parts on traffic safety, which we hope are solutions that others can replicate. We look forward to the input of the key stakeholders gathered here today and a robust conversation about how to achieve safer roads for everyone. Again, thank you for your time, your participation, and your commitment to consumer safety.
Thank you, Jennifer. We appreciate your support for traffic safety and also particularly for this issue. Our first speaker is Otto Matheke. He has served as the Director of NHTSA's Office of Vehicle Safety Compliance since March 2019, and he leads test programs to determine vehicle and equipment compliance with safety standards, also enforcing importation statutes and regulations, and administering and enforcing this corporate average fuel economy program. He's a NHTSA veteran with over 30 years of experience, and he's also acting chief counsel for litigation, acting director of the Office of Defects and Investigation, which is known as ODI, and acting chief of the Trends Analysis Division of ODI. We are so excited to have you with us today, Otto. Please take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. First slide, please. So I'm Otto Matheke. I'm not acting in all those positions presently. I did act in them before. I'm very happy to be here. If for no other reason than this is an audience would actually knows what NHTSA is and what NHTSA does. Next slide, please. So my particular operation, the Office of Vehicle Safety Compliance, is responsible for performing compliance tests. We have 65 motor vehicle and equipment standards. We do 25 to 60 test 25 to 60 new vehicles every year. But for the purposes of this presentation, probably the most important thing that we do is monitor imports for compliance. Imported vehicles and equipment have to meet federal standards. Regulated items, there are about 18 of our safety standards that apply to equipment items. Those all have to be certified as compliant when they show up at the border. Further, their manufacturers have to be registered with NHTSA, and the items cannot have any safety-related defects. Next slide, please. So I do not, unfortunately, have much resources in terms of boots on the ground. We have a very strong relationship with CBP, and we rely on them because, of course, there are 328 ports in the United States. There's a lot of stuff coming in, and we have some training and information exchange with CBP where we tell them, okay, this is what you look for. And when you're looking at compliance, oftentimes you also discover that items are not what they are supposed to be, and they may be counterfeit. There are a number of different bodies that are affiliated with or work with customs that are very important. You're going to be hearing about the A2C2 and the IPR, Intellectual Property Rights Center. We are also work a lot with CTAC, which does a lot in terms of trying to detect counterfeit goods. Next slide, please. So here's what we're looking at in terms of volume. These are, mostly pre-pandemic figures, but you can see that we have $16 billion to $20 billion worth of equipment items coming in each year. The top line, not surprisingly, is tires. The second line down is lighting, and the third line down is airbags. So these are all fairly safety critical items, particularly airbags. So it's very, very important that everybody and anybody who can keep an eye on these particular types of products. Next slide, please. This is a test that was performed at NHTSA's test facility in Ohio back in 2012 and involves a counterfeit Honda airbag. And as you can tell from this slide, this is not good. Next slide, please. Similarly, in recent years, there's been an increasing number of counterfeit child car seats coming into the market, particularly in terms of high-end sets that combine the stroller and a carrier into an ensemble that has a particular appeal, of course, to stressed and harried parents. We're trying to simplify their lives. Making a copycat or a counterfeit product there is very attractive because a lot of the original products are fairly expensive. And so this is the result of a test of a copycat child restraint versus an authentic child restraint. And again, the results are obvious. Next slide, please. So I know that there are some in the audience who are familiar with the child, certified child restraint installation program. God bless you people for doing this. You're familiar with what makes a good child seat a good child seat. We found that at looking at counterfeits, that some of them, a lot of them, don't have all the equipment they're supposed to have, or they're not labeled the way they are supposed to be. Your certification label needs to be a white label with red and black text. In particular, counterfeiters are not that anxious to put the manufacturer label with all the contact info and identifying info on it. And similarly, we've also found with counterfeit products that they may omit the required latch safety system hooks, which are circled in red, and have the required belt guides. They may have one or the other, usually just belt guides. Next slide, please. Tires, again, are a big part of the market. The equipment standards that we regulate, seat belts, lighting, child restraints, helmets, brake hoses, glass, tires, must have the certification label or DOT mark on them. That DOT mark is very, very important in terms of our relationship with customs, because this provides the customs people with a quick, objective check. There's no need to test anything. All they have to do is look for the DOT mark. Of course, if there isn't a DOT mark on the product, and it's one of the things that are covered by our equipment standards, then that may very well be a counterfeit product. Next slide, please. Okay. What else to look for? All right. Poor quality printing on labels, spelling errors. I love this one because I actually saw this once. It's Bosch, B-O-S-C-H, not B-O-S-H. Poor quality or redundant barcodes across lots, okay? If there are 4 or 5 airbags, you know, in a shipment, or 20 airbags in a shipment, and they all have poor quality barcodes or exactly the same barcodes on every single one, that is a giveaway. If it's a product that requires good finishing on edges or joints, you look for that. Bad welds, inappropriate fasteners, they don't look like automotive fasteners. With airbags, if the airbag cover fits poorly, that is a sign that you may be dealing with a counterfeit. If you are investigating a crash, post-deployment crash, look at the vehicle history. Unfortunately, a fatality that I'm familiar with involved a vehicle with a salvage title, where the vehicle had been in a prior deployment accident before it was repaired. A non-dealer repaired it. It was given a counterfeit airbag, and that counterfeit airbag unfortunately killed an occupant. If you're looking at a post-deployment airbag as part of an investigation, is the airbag cover torn or fractured in a random pattern? Is the airbag torn? Is it burned? Is the inflator housing burst? Next slide, please. These are some examples of the kind of poor construction that I related to you earlier. Really bad welds, stuff from the hardware store welded to the housing. This is not a genuine airbag module. Next slide, please. If you run across this, who do you notify? Who do you call? All right, well, if there's a safety consequence or it's a regulated item, right, contact NHTSA, okay? My division, OVSC public@dot.gov. You may also contact the DOT Inspector General. Again, very important, if you think it's a counterfeit, safety related or not, the National Intellectual Property Rights Coordination Center. Also accessible by StopFakes.gov. Finally, A2C2, I'm going to pronounce this correctly one of these days, is the organization that is doing the most work in this area. And so it's vital that you contact them. So I hope I did this in less than 8 minutes. And thank you all for attending. And I look forward to your questions.
Great. Thank you, Otto. We appreciate your presentation and the information that you provided. Our next presenter is Ryan KJ Dickey, who is a prosecutor with the Computer Crime and Intellectual Property section under the Criminal Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. He was previously an assistant U.S. attorney in the cybercrime unit of the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of Columbia. He's also served as a clerk for a federal judge in Hawaii and worked with a law firm in Washington, D.C. So welcome, Ryan. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Kerry. I really appreciate it. As Kerry said, my name's Ryan Dickey, and I've been a prosecutor with the Department of Justice for about 13 years. And for a good chunk of that time, I have focused on intellectual property and cybercrime cases. So in the next 8 minutes, we're going to try to touch on the following topics, just 1 or 2 minutes per topic, starting with the if we can go to the next slide here, we're going to start with the relevant U.S. criminal offenses. Then we're going to talk about some of the hurdles that we have in those cases, which tend to be in the areas of knowledge and intent. I have some sentencing facts to share. And then if you're in the unfortunate position of being a victim of one of these offenses, some information on what to do if you're a victim and how to prevent yourself from becoming a victim. And we'll close with just a couple of examples of cases over the last couple of years. So the US law provides at least 2 criminal offenses. These are felony offenses that specifically address the issue of trafficking in counterfeit goods, and that includes counterfeit car parts. These are both contained in Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 2320. The first one prohibits or criminalizes trafficking in goods and knowingly using a counterfeit mark on or in connection with those goods. And the second prohibits trafficking in labels, in boxes or in packaging, knowing that a counterfeit mark has been applied. So we have these 2 separate offenses. They are both contained in Title 18, Section 2320, and they're meant to address 2 situations that we often see counterfeiters doing, which is separating the counterfeit goods from the labels and packaging. So you have offenses that target both of those. And if we go on to the next slide, I'll share the maximum penalties for these offenses. All right, a first offense, maximum 10 years in prison and a fine of up to $2 million. So these are serious offenses with somewhat, in my opinion, significant penalties. In a second offense, or even in a first offense, if the offense causes serious bodily injury, there's a maximum of up to 20 years of incarceration and a fine of up to $5 million. And finally, if the offense causes death, then there's a potential for a maximum of life in prison and a fine of up to $5 million. And I think you've heard already how significant the danger is in terms of health and safety from these types of cases. If we go on to the next slide, you can see that these aren't the only offenses in the United States Code that address these issues. There are also fraud offenses, smuggling offenses, money laundering, and transporting hazardous materials. US law also prohibits conspiracy to commit another offense. A conspiracy is just a criminal partnership, and also aiding and abetting an offense. So the trafficking in counterfeit goods that's we've just looked at under 2320 isn't the only offense. There are a number that are available. What are the major hurdles that we face? Well, under US law, we meaning the US government, the prosecution, must show beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant intentionally trafficked in goods and knowingly used a counterfeit mark on or in connection with those goods. That's the standard that's set by 2320. You can see here the definition of a counterfeit mark. It has to be identical to or substantially indistinguishable from a mark that's actually registered with the PTO. So how do we prove knowledge and intent. Well, the next slide here lists some of the major pieces of evidence that law enforcement officers and prosecutors will be looking for in a case, starting with obvious or significant price differences between infringing and genuine items, although we see many cases with really good quality counterfeits that look a lot like genuine items that are being sold at essentially the same prices, but that's a factor. We're looking to see whether this particular defendant has been put on notice somehow that what they're doing is unlawful or that what they're doing infringes the rights of a third party. So cease and desist letters, for example, third-party abuse notifications, customs seizure letters. These types of notifications can be very helpful for proving knowledge and intent. We'll also look at whether there have been any past civil lawsuits, prior criminal convictions, of course, and then we'll be looking very closely at what this defendant has said and statements made, advertising on a website, on an e-commerce platform, etc. So those are the areas that law enforcement will be focused on. When we move to sentencing in a case, the United States Sentencing Commission does publish facts and information about convictions, and I believe the facts you see here come from the 2021 to 2022 fiscal year. So if you look across the Department of Justice, all of the different offenses, now this includes not just the 2320 counterfeit goods, but it also does include copyright. Those are lumped together. But you'll see that the median infringement amount in those cases was $236,000 plus change there. The overwhelming vast majority of the folks who are convicted under these statutes have very little or no criminal history. Roughly half of those folks, just over half, are sentenced to a term of imprisonment. And those have an average term of 12 months, so 1 year. And then the remainder are sentenced to terms of probation, home confinement, or community confinement. All right, so what do you do if you find yourself in the unfortunate position of being a victim of these offenses? Well, you already heard from Otto that you can report to the National Intellectual Property Rights Coordination Center, the IPR Center. If you do that, you will see that there is a report IP theft, and here's a picture of that, where you can report that offense. You can think of the IPR Center like a fusion center, where you have more than 24 federal and international law enforcement bodies, including Homeland Security investigations, Federal Bureau of Investigations, and Customs. You can also visit the website of my office, which is the Computer Crime and Intellectual Property section. You can see our website here. We have a guide for victims. I think it also contains some good information on how to avoid becoming a victim. But if you do find yourself as a victim, it has a checklist of information to gather that law enforcement are likely to ask about. So if we can finish up here with just 2 slides on cases. The first one is United States versus David Nichols. And Mr. Nichols was someone who imported hundreds of counterfeit airbags from China and supplied them to somebody who then sold them online to consumers. So Mr. Nichols pled guilty in January of 2018 to trafficking in counterfeit goods, and he was sentenced in 2019. He received 1 year in prison, and he was ordered to pay $75,000 in restitution. The last case example I have is United States versus Emiliano Rodriguez. This was a case out of the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. Now, Mr. Rodriguez was an auto mechanic, imported hundreds of counterfeit airbags also from China, and installed them in cars, which were then resold to consumers. So he pled guilty recently. This was in February of 2023, and he pled guilty to trafficking in counterfeit goods and causing delivery of hazardous materials. Now, he'll be sentenced this upcoming summer, so be on the lookout, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Ryan. We really appreciate the information. It's a really interesting perspective that maybe we don't always see. We do have another speaker, Teena Bohi, who is here, but she will not be on camera, so you'll just have to listen carefully. She is the Senior Brand Protection Analyst at Toyota Motor North America, where she supports strategies to combat the harmful impact of counterfeit automotive parts. From 2020 to 2022, she served as president of the Automotive Anti-Counterfeiting Council, we're calling it A2C2, and remains a champion of the Council's mission to promote cooperation among automakers to eliminate the sale of counterfeit parts. She also engages online marketplaces to increase awareness about the risks of counterfeits. She promotes consumer safety and also works to enhance efforts to keep counterfeit parts, especially counterfeit airbag parts, off the markets entirely. So Teena, take it away.
Great, thank you, Kerry. So, you know, Otto and Ryan and now Kerry have given us a great introduction as the Automotive Anti-Counterfeiting Council. You know, I'll call it A2C2 moving forward, just for ease on everyone's ears. And I apologize for not being on camera today. I am doing a training on behalf of the Automotive Anti-Counterfeiting Council in the Port of Alaska. So the video connection wasn't as great as I thought it was going to be. But go ahead to the next slide, Kerry. So the Automotive Anti-Counterfeiting Council was formed in 2015, and now we're comprised of 11 U.S. automakers. If you watch TV at all, you know that we are fierce competitors when it comes to vehicle sales. But one of the things that we realized early on was that we are all fighting the same problem of dangerous automotive counterfeit parts. And in doing that, we were all using some pretty common tactics. And so, you know, we were urged by the IPR Center, as you've also heard a little bit about today, to come together to start speaking and see if there were ways to, you know, maximize our resources, broaden our reach, and really speak as a strong industry voice. And our mission statement is quite simple, and that is to collaborate with each other and our partners to eliminate counterfeit auto parts that could harm U.S. consumers. So if you go to the next slide, Kerry, you know, we, like I said, came together to form an industry voice, and we've realized that in doing that, you know, it does allow us to really focus and, you know, share the burden of fighting counterfeit auto parts. And we have three main areas of focus as an association. One of those is training and awareness. So we do train U.S. Customs, federal and local agents, as well as state. And we also work to educate consumers, our own dealers, independent repair facilities, and members of the collision industry about the dangers of counterfeit parts. Now, Kerry mentioned one of my responsibilities is to engage e-commerce, and so we do that on an active basis because we want them to understand the importance of the products that are being sold on their platform and the parts that they play in that. And then, you know, as Ryan mentioned, some of the great outcomes of, you know, prosecution, we do work to support and share information on investigations and enforcement with law enforcement agencies. Next slide. So, you know, our message is pretty simple. Every auto part is a safety concern. Every auto part can and is being counterfeited, and every counterfeit auto part is potentially dangerous. And we're going to show you a video in just a minute that explains that. But the auto industry is a good target because we have, you know, global manufacturing. We have millions and millions of vehicles on the road across the world, and everybody needs auto parts. So we do find ourselves being a prime target for counterfeiters. Next slide. So we do produce as an industry some auto generic, if you will, not brand specific training collateral materials that are available on our website. So if you go to a2c2.com, you'll find this infographic along with other great resources that explain a little bit more about what counterfeit parts are, how they are potentially identified, so some red flags, and then how to contact not just A2C2, but the automakers if need be. So next, we're going to just show a really quick video that A2C2 produced that demonstrates the dangers, in addition to what Otto shared, of counterfeit parts. Can you play? Oh yeah, play the video. Thanks. Sorry.
The Automotive Anti-Counterfeiting Council, known as A2C2, is a group of North American automakers working together to fight counterfeit automotive components that could harm U.S. consumers. A test conducted by the National
Is the
Highway
video
Traffic
playing?
Safety Administration shows the catastrophic failure of a counterfeit airbag.
Oh, there we go. Thanks.
Hyundai purchased what proved to be a counterfeit driver's side airbag from an e-commerce platform, then tested the counterfeit versus a genuine Hyundai airbag. The results revealed a potentially deadly impact that the driver could suffer without the protection typically provided by a genuine airbag. Honda used a watermelon to help demonstrate the tight specifications to which genuine airbags are built and why it's so important that the airbag deploys at exactly the right moment in a collision. In comparing genuine versus counterfeit airbags, all of the counterfeits failed to deploy in a proper manner. This shows how ineffective these potentially life-saving devices can be when counterfeited. Counterfeit auto parts are certainly not limited to airbags. Here, an Australian group runs a genuine aluminum wheel through a pothole test at just over 30 miles per hour, and it performs as intended. The counterfeit wheel, however, fails miserably as a section cracks and breaks away. In this example, a genuine Honda wheel passes a standard pothole bench test with flying colors, while the fake wheel collapses and fails. In brake testing, the car on the left veers off the road as it attempts to stop using a counterfeit brake pad, while in a bench test comparing the counterfeit pad with a genuine Nissan part, the counterfeit begins to smoke after just a couple applications, and by the 6th try, it actually ignites, potentially igniting the vehicle as well.
Okay, great. So, that video just goes on to demonstrate some of the dangers that you've already heard discussed in the call today. But, one of the most egregious counterfeit parts, as Ryan mentioned, are in auto, are counterfeit airbags. We do have some known fatalities as a result of counterfeit airbags, and one of these is on the slide right now. And really, the bottom line is that this was a survivable crash between two vehicles. But in this instance, the airbag, as you can see from some of the photos, catastrophically deployed and unfortunately caused severe trauma and fatal trauma to one of the drivers of the vehicle. So again, just can't, understate or overstate the dangers posed by counterfeit auto parts. Next slide. So we do, again, really focus on training and awareness so that folks are aware of how counterfeit parts are distributed and some of the things that they can do to protect themselves. We do have, as I mentioned, a website with a lot of great information available on it, including the video that you just saw. But some of the red flags that, all of us can be aware of, or if the deal is too good to be true, then it probably is. And it's very important to know and understand and seek information about the source of the parts that are being used to repair your vehicle, whether you're doing those repairs on your own or whether a repair shop is doing them for you. And then again, if you receive a product, if the packaging is poor or just looks damaged or not up to par, that's a big red flag. And the message to everyone that we speak with, whether it be at a consumer level or a law enforcement level, is we don't expect you to be the experts on counterfeit auto parts. That's our job. We just want to make sure that you know how to contact us. So that can be done through h2c2.com. Next slide. So we do a lot of training, and we're doing that today. In the last few years, we've ultimately trained almost 4,000 law enforcement agents and CBP officers across the world. And next slide, we'll talk about some of the things that we do to engage e-commerce. And one of the main things that we encourage them to do is to understand the counterfeit. Oh, sorry. Go ahead to the next slide. Thanks. So e-commerce engagement is important because e-commerce is how a lot of parts are being advertised and distributed to consumers and also repair shops. So we want them to understand the dangers that these parts pose and how they can identify them on their marketplaces, and then also to strengthen their own policies and be proactive in identification and the stoppage of potential counterfeiters. Next slide. This just goes to show, and I think this slide is a build, that no part of the country has the market cornered on counterfeit parts. You heard some examples of just a few investigations from Ryan that were successful, but you can see here that it's all different parts and it's all different parts of the country. Next slide. And this is one of the slides that we do present in our training, and it kind of shows a case soup to nuts on how a lot of times we're alerted to counterfeiters and the things that we do as an industry group to forward those cases so that enforcement can be carried out. And one of the most important things is sharing information among ourselves about bad actors and with law enforcement, and doing the kind of groundwork and legwork to support those cases as they're developed by doing test buys, providing affidavits and authentications, all the way up to, if need be, appearing in a court case in front of a judge. Next slide. One of the last and kind of important things that we do is advocate for change. So we have made ourselves a pretty strong presence in Washington, D.C., speaking with policymakers. And two of the important pieces of legislation that we support and have supported are on the next slide. And that would be the Informed Consumers Act, which was passed last year and will go in effect at the end of June, which will require online marketplaces to disclose and make available seller information for some high volume third-party sellers. So we think this is a huge step in the right direction to remove some of the anonymity of online selling and make the source of goods more available to consumers who are shopping online. And the other piece of legislation is Shop Safe, which didn't quite make it to be passed, and so we are still advocating for that. But it adds a piece of liability for online marketplaces who don't follow a certain set of best practices. So again, this is just a real short glimpse on how the automotive industry has come to work together and partner with law enforcement agencies to identify and bring to prosecution the sellers of counterfeit auto parts. Thank you, Kerry.
Thank you, Teena. And we are rounding out our panel with Craig Orlan. He is the Director of State and Local Government Relations at the American Honda Motor Company. He oversees the company's legislative affairs, advocacy, and public policy efforts, and he does that before both state and local governments. He's led an industry-wide effort to enact legislation to address the proliferation of counterfeit and non-functional airbags, and to date, 33 states have enacted his model legislation, which has been endorsed by multiple public policy organizations and other industry groups. So as a reminder, we have time for questions, so please do submit them in the questions panel. And with that, Craig, let's get started with you.
All right, thanks a lot, Kerry. It's really good to be here. And helping to lead American Honda's anti-counterfeiting program really has been one of the highlights of my 10-year career here at Honda. I'm inspired every day by kind of the work of some of my colleagues at Honda and across the industry who do great work just to improve vehicle safety. And it really is just sort of shocking that people would compromise all of that work to try to turn a profit. So really glad to be here. This slide right here talks a little bit about American Honda's overall counterfeit strategy. We try to take a holistic approach to this problem. So again, a key part of that is educating consumers, dealers, industry and government officials, and doing things like this. We've done outreach to consumers. We've done a lot of media work. We work very closely with Teena and the folks at A2C2 to try to address this problem. On the other side, we're trying to reduce the listing of counterfeits online at the same time. So Those are offered on various websites that you may or may not have heard of. And unfortunately, the trend has been increasing where we see more and more of these products listed, but we are aggressively trying to work with those groups to get those products delisted. Again, as Teena mentioned before, we're supporting law enforcement whenever we can. So that means we're working to provide leads. We're out there on the internet trying to identify these products and provide information to law enforcement. We go on seizures. We try to help identify what's a real part, what's a fake part. And whenever necessary, we're happy to go to court to provide expert testimony. But the part I'm really here to talk about is sort of enacting state legislation. And again, what we're doing is trying to enact state bills that supplement federal law enforcement efforts and will help give law enforcement just another tool in the toolbox to work with. So if we can go on to the next slide. I think this is a really helpful slide that sort of shows just how this airbag scam works. But before I jump into that, I do want to just talk a little bit about the video that Teena showed. I'm really glad she did, because a lot of times when we talk about counterfeit auto parts, it can seem kind of abstract. We don't really have great statistics about the numbers of parts that are imported into the country or how many of these are out there, just because there aren't statistics on an underground economy. But on the side of this slide, you'll see sort of the human face of this issue. There was a woman in Texas. Teena talked about a fatality in Maryland. I'll talk very briefly about one in Texas where a woman bought a used vehicle that she thought had all the proper airbags, and she was in a single car collision with a tree that should have been otherwise survivable. And in the bottom, you'll see sort of the airbag that was in her car versus another car. So again, the counterfeiters here weren't even trying to replicate the safety technology. They took a shop rag, filled it with some putty, and just stuck it in the steering wheel. And again, clearly there's no intention that that's ever going to provide protection in the event of a crash. But again, we were only made aware of this after the case. And our goal with this legislation is to try to help stop these products at the border. So the way that most of these scams work is that, you'll see the graphic jumped ahead a little bit there, but most of these products are imported from overseas. And as we talked about before, the federal law enforcement has some tools to try to stop that, and they've been a great partner in trying to address the proliferation of counterfeit parts, but they can only act in certain circumstances. If there's a violation of federal trademark law, or if there's a violation of hazmat law. There unfortunately isn't a federal or state law that prohibits just importing a bad piece of plastic. So if you get into your vehicle, your car doesn't just have a driver's side airbag, there are multiple airbags throughout the cabin of the vehicle. So only that front driver's side airbag has a Honda H or a Ford Oval or a Toyota logo. But if you look in your rear seat, a lot of those airbags just say SRS component or airbag. And again, if there's just a piece of plastic that's coming through, even if federal law enforcement is aware of it, they can't always stop it. So in that case, they enter the country where they're listed online on, again, various websites that you may or may not have heard of, and purchased by unscrupulous repair shops who install those products in the vehicles of unknowing consumers. So go on to the next slide. And one of the reasons we realized we needed these state laws was sort of originating out of this one case in North Carolina a couple of years ago. There was one man who was arrested. He sold over 7,000 counterfeit airbags online, and in just over a year made nearly $1.5 million. So clearly this is a very lucrative business. And ultimately he was arrested with, I believe, something like 4,000 airbags in his possession. But again, when he went to court, his attorneys cited sort of that there was a lack of state laws. And they really presented this as a civil issue between OEMs and a small businessman. And they said this wasn't a criminal case involving consumer fraud. And just to point out how sort of absurd that argument is, one of the airbags that was confiscated is shown there. Again, you can see that it's not replicating our technology. It's just filled with styrofoam. So there's clearly no intention that this part is going to provide any sort of protection in the event of a crash. But again, it did sort of highlight the need for state laws to supplement federal laws. Again, as it was mentioned before, there's a lot of tools federal law enforcement has once an airbag has been deployed, or a counterfeit airbag has been deployed, involving manslaughter and fraud and other things. But our goal at Honda and with the rest of A2C2 is to try to stop these products from ever getting into the vehicles of unknowing consumers. So We can go ahead to the next slide. So what we've done is we've worked to craft some counterfeit airbag legislation. And what this legislation does, it prohibits the knowing and intentional manufacture, importation, sale, installation, and reinstallation of counterfeit airbags and what we're calling non-functional airbags, which are replacement airbags or SRS components that don't necessarily have a logo on it. And again, what this does is it supplements that federal law and really allows for better state and federal cooperation. So again, if federal agents are tracking a package that's entering the country that's inbound to, say, Seattle, then you can reach out to the local attorney general, district attorney, whoever might have jurisdiction for that case, and say, hey, listen, we've got this suspicious package coming in. Would you like us to seize this on your behalf? And again, it allows them to work together. What it also does is it allows for what local law enforcement or federal law enforcement, to leverage sort of these state and local laws to give them more leverage over the folks who are installing these in customers' vehicles. So it gives them another charge to negotiate with, to get the records of folks who may or may not have these in their vehicles and not know it. So it's been an incredibly effective tool. We've worked to get this, as Kerry mentioned, in 33 states across the country. We've got a couple more pending this year, and our goal in the next couple of years is to enact this sort of legislation all across the country. And as you can see, this has been passed, in red states and blue states. I think our overall vote count on this is something like 7,000 to 5. So again, this is one of the more bipartisan issues. Nobody's really in favor of Chinese counterfeits, but again, our goal is really to allow these things to be seized at the border and try to keep tragedies from happening in the first place. So if you scroll over to the next slide, again, just sort of taking a look now, and you can scroll through, there's some graphics here again before. So, instead of just having that state law, the federal laws, now they can capture more of these products using the federal law. There's also a prohibition against listing this, which puts more pressure on the e-commerce retailers to delist these programs. And again, now we have tools that allow state and local folks to go after the repair shops who are knowingly and intentionally installing these in customers' vehicles. And again, we've really focused on airbags here just because it is a critical safety part, because there are no legitimate aftermarket airbag manufacturers. But the important thing to note is that counterfeiters aren't brand or part loyal. So if somebody's installing a counterfeit airbag in a Honda vehicle, they're probably also installing a counterfeit brake in a Nissan vehicle or a counterfeit wheel in a Toyota vehicle. So it allows us to go after the bad actors. And again, in the 33 states that we've enacted this, I think there have only been about 15 to 20 prosecutions. So it's not a lot of people who would do something this heinous, but again, these folks are importing, thousands to tens of thousands of these parts. So we are really trying to go after the bad actors here. Next slide. Yep, that was it for me. So.
Okay, thank you, Craig. And if our other panelists could join us on video. And again, Teena is here, but she has her cloak of invisibility on. So please go ahead and submit your questions. We're going to do some lightning round questions. Welcome back, everybody. Craig, you're not off the hook yet. So I want to start with you. We do have a lot of law enforcement and first responders on the webinar today. So if an officer arrives on scene and they suspect there's a counterfeit part, what are their next steps? What do they need to do?
So the old saying, if you see something, say something, is perfectly appropriate. I think back to the case that Teena referenced in Columbia, Maryland, which is actually just a couple of miles from where I live. So the only reason we're aware of that is because the officer on scene sort of had been a 20-year veteran, and he saw that this is not the way an airbag should deploy. I've never seen these types of injuries before. He took that to his supervisors. They went and ultimately reported it to NHTSA. It was a Honda vehicle, unfortunately, that was involved. So NHTSA got in contact with us, and we did a whole investigation, and ultimately were able to determine that was a counterfeit, and again, go after the repair shop that installed that, and again, try to get their records to find out where else these might be involved. But again, if you see anything suspicious, be it, just an airbag deploying in a way it shouldn't, or a cabin filled with styrofoam packing peanuts, please contact your superior officer. Please push them to contact NHTSA, the IPR center, the contacts that Otto and Ryan have shared before. And it's something our industry takes very seriously, and we'll look into it.
Yeah, thanks. And we will have a link to those resources in the follow-up email that will go out tomorrow. We have a question, I think it's for you, Otto. It's from Katrina, and she says, FMVSS 225 regulates latch hardware in vehicles. And as a CPS technician and instructor, they often see aftermarket latch hardware for sale on e-commerce platforms. And she's wondering if, stopping those unsafe products are being sold. Is that under NHTSA? Is that the work of A2C2? And then who should they report it to?
Well, I think you should report it to NHTSA. I mean, first off, it's hard to determine whether or not something, without seeing these products, whether that's could be considered to be a counterfeit or not. But we are certainly always concerned about products that are potentially defective or non-compliant. And we do have relationships with some of the major online platforms, and we have been successful in some instances of getting them to take down products which are demonstrably unsafe. This is an area that is difficult because the law is not quite clear about the liability of online platforms for hosting sales of products that may be non-compliant. So at this point in time, we really don't have the authority to take direct action against, say, a platform such as eBay or Amazon. So we're working cooperatively with them, and they have been responsive in some instances in taking down these products. But it's an evolving area of the law. It's going to have to change in the future, I think. So report it to us. We want to know.
Sounds good. And you mentioned a lot of kind of moving parts. So Ryan, I'm going to kick it to you. There's a lot going on in this counterfeit ecosystem. And so I'm wondering, what are some of the things that you're seeing? What are some of the trends?
So thank you, Kerry. I mean, I think over the last few years, you're seeing counterfeiters starting to use, adopting some of the same trends that we see a lot of legitimate companies using, right? They're kind of following where the popular and effective e-commerce sites are, creating marketplaces on some of the major e-commerce platforms, and then as opposed to having their own websites, which is what we probably saw like 10 years ago or earlier. And then more recently, and I think it's just an evolution of that idea, you're seeing a lot of drop shipping. And so you can have somebody who's based in a foreign country ship their goods that are sold through one of these marketplaces, and the goods are going to come into the United States. They're going to go to a drop shipping warehouse, and the folks that work at their warehouse may have no idea where the goods are coming from, who the customers are, and they are just taking those items and putting them into the next shipment. And that makes it very difficult for law enforcement to show that they have knowledge and intent of the counterfeiting. So those are a couple of the things that we're seeing. Of course, we're also seeing the rise of cryptocurrency to pay for these items. That makes that a little bit more difficult to track, but those are just a handful of the trends that we're seeing.
Well, it sounds like from all of you today, what you're talking about really is communication. So you're all communicating with each other through A2C2, but it also sounds like you also have a lot of efforts, and you need communication from the public. So people that are on the webinar today, whether they are a first responder or they work an auto parts shop, or they're just a consumer like me who needs to be buyer beware. Those were some great tips that were shared earlier. I'm wondering, one of the questions that we have is for you, Teena. How does somebody join A2C2? And can individuals join, or what are some resources that can be provided?
Yeah, that's a good question, Kerry. We do limit our membership to automotive manufacturers who have a fair amount of production in North America. But that's not to say that we don't invite participation. We do have a lot of guest attendees from time to time. We are more than willing to do like what we're doing today and hold a webinar for any group that would like to know more about this issue and collaborate with A2C2. As I mentioned, we do have A2C2.com, which is kind of a industry type website, industry-facing, law enforcement-facing website. And then we also have a consumer awareness site, so it's a2c2.com/awareness, where a lot of consumer-facing materials are available as well. So we invite all contact.
Well, I have to say, this hour has flown by. On behalf of GHSA, I want to thank all of you for joining us today and for really sharing the important information about what's going on with counterfeit vehicle parts. And of course, Honda, thank you for your partnership and support of the annual meeting. We want to thank all of you who gave of your time. And before you go, please do mark your calendars for the GHSA 2023 annual meeting, which will be in New York City this August 12th through the 16th. If you haven't heard yet, we've got some great speakers, including Al Roker, who's an avid pedestrian and co-host of NBC News' Today Show. He will be the keynote at the closing luncheon, but we have so much more, and you can read all about it at ghsa.org. We'll include resources from today, as well as information on the annual meeting in the email that will go out tomorrow. With that, I just want to thank you all for joining us today. We hope to see you in New York City. And I just want to once again thank Craig, Ryan, Otto, Teena for taking their time and giving us, I think, a really well-rounded conversation. I think everybody that joined us today can see that this really is about partnership and everybody putting their piece into the puzzle to make sure that we can stop those counterfeit parts from coming in and then being sold. So thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. And I hope everybody has a really good day. Bye now.